Welcome to WP-Tonic episode 142, and today we're discussing marketing for nonprofits. Before we get into the main topic, I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. Sallie, who are you, and what do you do?
My name is Sallie Goetsch, and lately I don't do very much, but most of the time I build WordPress websites for small businesses and nonprofits, and I'm also the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California.
Morten, present yourself.
I am Morten. I'm a senior staff instructor at LinkedIn Learning at lynda.com, and I build interesting things. Right now I'm working on an enormous gulp process for simplifying WordPress theme development in preparation for HTTP2 and things like that.
Sounds very ambitious.
What needs to be different about theme development for HTTP2?
Everything.
Everything?
Yes.
Well, there's another show topic, isn't there, John?
Oh, yes.
We've got two show topics now. We have to,
Absolutely. That is something that needs to be covered in detail.
All right.
Very good. Very good. Looking forward. Jonathan, who are you?
I'm the founder of this crazy show, WP-Tonic, and we're also a WordPress maintenance company and a support resource for designers, WordPress consultants, anybody looking for custom themes, custom plugins. We can help you out.
Very good. And I'm John Locke. My business is Lockdown Design, and I help blue-collar businesses with their WordPress sites, and specifically with local SEO and WooCommerce integration. Before we get into today's main topic, marketing for nonprofits, we have a couple WordPress news stories. WordPress news story number one is, does Jetpack slow down a WordPress website? From our friend Matt Medeiros. And Sallie, what was your take on this?
Well, I had read an article sort of like this a while ago. I can't remember how long, that came to roughly the same conclusion that, if you are not running every single freaking feature of Jetpack at once, which pretty much nobody would do, the performance hit isn't necessarily catastrophic. I think probably the thing you run into is situations where it gets installed and nobody goes in to check the settings and see, all right, what out of these things do I actually want? There's no point installing it if you don't want several of the things that it does. But often the things that you want and the things that are enabled by default are not necessarily going to be the same.
Most definitely. Morten, what's your dealings with Jetpack?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same. Like, I've also seen tons of, this is a conversation that keeps surfacing every once in a while, where someone installs Jetpack and they go, oh my God, everything got super slow. Or more normally, they go into a client website that's performing terribly and they disable Jetpack, and then all of a sudden the performance just shoots up. And I think it's exactly what Sallie just said, that the plugin itself doesn't really do much. It's basically a container for other plugins. And if you start activating all those plugins, then every time you make the computer do more work, things slow down, obviously. So it's I guess, a more nuanced approach to a very simplified conversation about something, because there's a lot of political issues with Jetpack as a whole, right? It's not like people have issues with the concept of Jetpack and are trying to find reasons to say you should just blanket stop using it for whatever reason, right? It's not secure. It slows your site down, whatever. And yeah,
it's rhetoric.
Yes, I think so.
Before and Jonathan, definitely, I know that you have strong opinions on Jetpack too, but I'll just want to tell people, in case that they don't know, Jetpack is basically a bundle of plugins. It's a free plugin in the WordPress repository. It's basically a bundle of a whole bunch of other smaller plugins. It's run by Automatic, which is the parent company of WordPress, and to connect it, you need a WordPress.com account. Jonathan, what was your take on Matt's article? Were you surprised by the findings, or?
Not really. No. I just don't like the concept. I think the concept makes perfect sense on WordPress.com, but as a concept for a self-hosted solution, I don't really follow the logic of the fundamental concept of this Swiss Army knife that you're supposed to install. And I follow Morten's and Sallie's logic. If you don't switch on everything, you'll probably be fine. But that goes against the actual concept of the plugin, which is all-embracing replacement, a one source where you know where it came from, where you should switch everything on, and on the security level, that's I think a justifiable reason. The XSS problems with it, it's not terrible, but I just don't like the idea of it. And we had that conversation as part of our roundtable about security, didn't we, John, about some of the security problems with Jetpack, which are well known and I don't think have been that well dealt with. That's my personal opinion. I just don't like the concept of the whole idea, really.
Well, definitely. That is something that we discussed in episode 140 when we were talking about security. The XML RPC can definitely be problematic. That's something that Jetpack uses. And what's bad about that is, malicious people can go in there, combine a whole bunch of password and username combinations and use XML RPC to try and brute force your site, which is why you would want to have some sort of block on that, either through a security plugin or something else. One thing I guess that surprised me about this article is, as a test, Matt took 3 other plugins that seemed to be popular in the repo, which is Photo Gallery, Add This for share buttons, and Google Analytics, and it seemed like the added load, the added page speed, seemed to be pretty much comparable to enabling like all the stuff in Jetpack.
Mm-hmm.
One thing
I guess most of that was Add This.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all.
No, neither am I. Social buttons can be a real offender.
Yeah, they are. If you want to, you got to be really. And that, yeah, I just don't like that either. I don't like anything, do I, folks?
Well, I have used the scriptless social sharing plugin on occasion because, the idea is to be extremely lightweight there, and I've been pretty happy with that. It kind of depends on, what you and or your client wants in the way of that sort of thing.
Here's a question, I guess, for the panel, and then we'll move on to the next news story. But what do you think about Jetpack since they redid their UI? Is it easier or harder to find out what's actually active or deactivated?
I haven't paid that much attention to the new UI because usually once I've set it up, I just kind of ignore it. But I think the last time they redid their UI, it was actually a little harder to find stuff. So if they've improved that, I'm in favor of it.
Well, I don't know because we don't install it. I don't want anything.
I actually use it like quite a bit, but I'll usually block like the XML RPC. Morten, your thoughts on the current version of the user interface?
Now that you're saying it, I'm like, did they change it again since last time I looked at it?
It was pretty recently. They sent me about like a dozen emails trying to get me to, applaud their new UI, and I just couldn't be arsed.
Give me 1 second. I'm just going to check that I'm not insane before I comment
I
on that.
apologise to the Jetpack team. Look, you're such. I've met you numerous times at WordCamps, and you're such nice people. And I feel such a horrible person saying such things. It's not. You're great, and if people want to use it, it's just at the present moment, it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the challenges that Jetpack faces is that it started out as a very, very simple thing. If I remember correctly, when you first installed Jetpack, if you started from the very beginning, you only had 3 functions. And then they started adding things on and adding things on. And in that process, they had to iterate on their design backwards. So originally, there was no plan of making this easy to understand in terms of what is activated and what is not. And then all of a sudden, when they had 1 million features, they had to change it. So last time I went into Jetpack, which admittedly is a couple of months ago, when you on the front page, you see a list of most popular plugins or something like that. And then there's like a little icon that tells you whether or not they're activated. And then to get into the settings, you have to click on it and then do something else to get into the settings. So it's an attempt at making the user interface very simple, but it's not necessarily telling people exactly what's going on in a clear and concise way. I think to what Matt's talking about in this article, the issue with Jetpack is that what it's trying to do is be a one-stop shop for all the things you would need if you're just setting up a basic website, right? So it's if you think about it as a whole, it's targeting the people who use WordPress who don't want to do any advanced development, don't do any advanced setup, they just want to get things to work properly. These are the same people that are likely to activate everything because they don't know what it is, and they're like, well, this sounds like something I should be using, in which case it slows down the site. Now, if you're going to do a true comparison between Jetpack and something else, you have to do a true comparison between the Jetpack feature as output and the something else feature as output. So for instance, Sallie was mentioning that the reason why the other plugins probably slowed down is because they were using add this. So the Jetpack social sharing feature is just a container that shows social links. Add this is an entire separate service that runs analytics and adds additional features to your site. Now, the thing with add this is, if you're using add this simply for social media buttons, you're not actually using add this as functionality. You're better off using something else, because add this, the whole point of that is you get all these other things like related external articles and massive analytics systems and pop-ins, and the social media buttons are almost like a side note to all that. And yeah, so yes, it's true that on the face of it, they look like they're serving up the same thing. And I think for the average user, you would not know the difference. But if you want to do a true comparison of Jetpack and a combination of the plugins, you have to find well-coded, properly defined plugins that only do the same thing. Now, but that's an inauthentic comparison for if you're trying to emulate a real user experience, because the real user will not code lint a plugin before they install it. They will simply go, that looks popular, click, right? So it's a multifaceted discussion, right? And that, I think that's why this very simplified Jetpack is evil, throw it away kind of messaging goes out, because people don't want to get into the weeds of this. They just want to say, don't do it, right?
I think everything you just said, that's why I didn't really want to comment too much on the article, because I love Matt and he's been on the show, and we treat him as a friend of the show. He's been very supportive. I don't think it was one of his greatest articles, in truth, because of the reasons you just outlined, Morten. So add this. Well, I would warn people, learn about the plugin before you install it, because we've had clients and it can be a bit difficult to remove it completely from your site after you've installed it. It's one of these that buries deep, really deep. But it was back to our interview with Robert, the security guy, John. The issue is that, like, around Robert was talking about security plugins, and I've been studying it a bit more and thinking a bit more about it. Is, you know, in the security you have these Swiss Army knife plugins, and we install a couple on client sites depending on which one we think is most suitable, and they are Swiss Army knives of security. And like Robert said, he wasn't a big fan of them, was he, John? He said you're better off looking at individual plugins that do the job that you're looking for really well, rather than these what he called Swiss Army knife of security plugins, didn't he, John? And I'm reassessing our position on that based on what Robert said to me on the show. So, but I think Jetpack's the same thing. It's just, I just don't. I think you're better off looking for an individual solution that was designed for that particular problem than an all-embracing solution developed by Jetpack. That's really fundamentally my position.
Well, I think that's right, as long as you know enough to look for the right things. You know, my understanding of Jetpack was it was basically created essentially to ease the transition between WordPress.com and self-hosted WordPress.
Yes.
That because people were like, so where are these things that I had on my WordPress.com site, and you know, that I'm used to having, and how do I, you know, and how do I get them? And so, okay, well, we'll stick them all together in this Jetpack thing, and then, you know, when you move from being on WordPress.com to being to having a self-hosted site, you will have all those familiar things there. And you know, I think for those people, it succeeds fairly well in doing that, except that, you know, their self-hosted site doesn't necessarily have all the, you know, additional improvements that are made on WordPress.com to ensure that their performance is good and all those other things.
Well, on what you've stated is, yeah, I totally agree with you, Sallie, but I just don't think the concept actually works. That was the theory. But I think you are moving to a self-hosted environment. So I think if you're going to go down that, you really either need to spend a bit of time educating yourself or hiring somebody. And what Jetpack attempts to try and do, I just don't think it works, basically. I think... And, yeah, sorry.
Like, when Jetpack first came out, I remember saying that this looks like an attempt by Automatic to commodify the self-hosted WordPress space and edge their way into it so that they could earn money off that space. And I remember originally saying it on Twitter or somewhere, and people were like, no, what are you talking about? That'll never happen. And then a month or two later, there showed up new buttons in Jetpack that said like paid, but they weren't real yet. And now it's like you go to jetpack.com, jetpack.com, and they have features and pricing. And here you can use the free version, or you can do the premium version for $100 a year, or you can do the professional version for $300 a year, right? And we were very closely butting up against the issue of Automatic as Automatic as a contributor to WordPress, and Automatic as an actual commercial enterprise, and throwing its weight around to try to get people to use its service, right? I mean, Akismet is now part of Jetpack, and Akismet is a paid service, and Akismet ships as a standard part of WordPress. Like, there are all these very, very, very complicated issues around this that have nothing to do with performance and everything to do with who runs the world, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there is a bit of a dark UI pattern. There is definitely a dark pattern with Jetpack. One thing that I've noticed, like just installing it on sites this month as compared to like a couple of months ago, is it's very, very hard to select that free option. They by default like put you in the 99 per year, and you have to really like work like when you're registering a new account to get it to the free option. So same thing with the Akismet. It starts with like, here's your, donation, and if you can slide it down to free, but like pretty much the default is like, paid for both Jetpack and Akismet. So yeah, that's how corporations. Yeah, it's complicated, but definitely they're don't make no mistake, they're in it to make some money too. So
which I think is fine. Shall we go on to the next story, John?
Yeah, we got a few minutes for this one. So the final WordPress news story for this week is Chris Lema on Joe Casabona's podcast, How I Built It, talking about how he's building beyondgood.com. Did anybody listen to this episode?
Afraid not.
I have not.
Okay. Jonathan, did you listen to this episode?
I read the article.
Okay. Anyway, I just listened to it like an hour ago. Basically, and maybe we'll talk about like some of the concepts here. Basically, it's built on Genesis. It's using WooCommerce with memberships by Skyverge. Shout out Becca Rice, episode 135. But one of the things that he was saying in there is a lot of people try and launch a full-blown site. And this site really like rolled out in stages. At first, it was just trying to get the proper amount of content in there and seeing the kind of feedback and the questions that people were asking. And then building out, seeing if there was an audience for this site about leadership. And then from there, building out the things like the membership, the store and things like that. And I just wanted to ask the panel, when it comes to like building websites in general, a lot of people just like try and build the full thing. And we've talked about this before, but is there like some wisdom in trying to gauge like what the audience is? Is there an audience for this? And then building out the other parts. Sallie.
I think that it makes a lot of sense if you can do it. And it kind of depends on the scale of the site that you're planning. If what you're planning is fairly simple to begin with, then you may not need to do that. But, you can look at the situation that Carrie Dills had with her membership site, where it just like, not only did it not gain the sort of traction for people to pay for it, but people were really just not even using that, and she switched everything over into a Slack channel, which seems to be getting a little more activity. To the degree that you can actually find information about what your users really want and are going to respond to, it makes sense to do that before you put a lot of time, effort, or money into creating it. Sometimes that's going to be easier to do than others, and every business is going to evolve and leave you in situations where you're, getting rid of something that was useful in the beginning but doesn't make sense anymore.
Morten, I want to ask you, there's another concept that you talked about in here when it comes to, getting content. And one thing that Chris Lema talked about in this episode was a lot of people get bothered when people are asking like a whole bunch of questions. Say you write an article and then they ask a whole bunch of questions in the comments. But he saw it as an opportunity to produce more content.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's correct. I think that when people want to launch a service like this, a service that is knowledge-based. So you're basically trying to get people to sign up for a service where you share content and you share your ideas and you get a discussion going and everything. What they often don't realize is you actually have to make all that content. And when I say all that content, I mean like an enormous amount of content. So we have a guideline that my company uses when we build new websites for just any company that wants to have a blog presence, is before the site launches, they need to have finished and ready to publish 50 articles, 50. If they don't have 50 articles ready to go, we're not launching the site yet. And that's not like 50 short little blips. That's a massive, properly written article with content. And the reason why we say 50 is we say you backlog 20 so that there's already content on the site. Then you have 20 that are lined up to be published over the next whatever many weeks, so that you don't in the launch process have to keep writing content. And then you have 10 that are time agnostic, that sit as drafts in the system as backup for when you, for whatever reason, can't write new articles. And every single time we do this, people freak out and they're like, 50 articles seem insane. And why would you want to write that? And I'm like, you want to publish content on the web and you think that you have something to say. Then you need to produce that content and show that you actually have something to say before you build the application to publish it. Otherwise, you'll just get a dead blog. Now, the question that inevitably comes from that is, how do I know what to write about? 50 is a lot. And that's exactly what we do. We say, go out and look at what people are asking questions about, or publish some very general article about something and somewhere else, and then see what kind of questions come in and use those questions as starting points. Because more often than not, you'll have more traction if you narrow down the scope of your article to something very, very specific and address it in detail than go for some massive general article about something. For example, I did an experiment a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, something like that, where I wrote an article about responsive images in general, just responsive images on the web, blah, 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 right? And then I wrote an article about specifically how WordPress handles responsive images, how you can control responsive images in your theme, and how handling them is different in featured images and regular content images. And it was a code breakdown. So it was insanely complex. Like, the article is ridiculously complex and very detailed. And it's basically taking a pile of code and nitpicking at it line by line through the whole thing, right? So you'd think that the general article with just like, this is responsive images and how they work, would have more traction than the insanely nitpicky one. But comparably, the one that had a lot of detail about a very, very specific topic had far more traction. And I think that's what he's getting at, that if you get a lot of questions about specifics and you use each of those as a starting point for a new conversation, you're more likely to get targeted conversations, because people who come into those conversations are looking for a solution to a problem. And it also just allows you to spin off new ideas that you previously weren't aware of, because usually people have far more general knowledge about topics than they are focally aware of, and they need someone else to tell them, hey, you obviously know more about this, can you tell me more? So I didn't watch or listen to the thing, but I'm sure he said something along these lines. Every time someone asks a question, write it down somewhere, because that's the starting point of a new article. That's a fairly standard method for approaching blogging in general. And it absolutely works specifically for business blogging, because it's true.
No, and I'm going to shout out like another article that I read. This was on the tactical social media.org site, but it was saying basically that content is there to build a relationship. The content is not the end all. And when people get, I'm getting all this email from this, comment. I don't want to reply to all this. I don't want to answer all these questions. It's like you're actually building authority for the person, as the person who can answer this stuff. It's a good thing. It's not an annoyance. And exactly what you said about being specific. On my own site, the articles that have the most comments and have nested like comment threads are the ones where I'm saying like, here's how you solve a very specific problem. Those are the ones that I get the most comments on. Mm-hmm. And so Jonathan, you read this article. What were your thoughts?
Well, kind of very similar to what Morten said, but I think there's so many ways you can take what Morten says, so many paths that I'm a bit reluctant. Well, let's have a go, Jonathan. So it's a bit linked to, once again, our chat with Heather Steele. 50 articles is a lot of material, but on the other hand, I think what Morten is trying to point out is it kind of forces them to look at the reality of the situation, and it's kind of a slap in a way, a cold bucket of water, of the reality of how much content is probably and how much resource, time, energy is going to have to be put. Look at the amount of work I've put into with your help as well, John, over the past 6 months that we've had to put into WP-Tonic to move it forward to some extent. And there's still a load of work to do. I think people just don't realise how much they tend to concentrate on the look of the website, which is important, and the technology. But what Morten is pointing out is the content is so important, and having some idea of the commitment. And for very small companies, they just cannot even consider that. But I think what Morten's talking about is medium-sized companies, which is what Heather Steele works with, and larger organisations. And it's linked to our main topic, non-profits, quite considerably, I would say. If a non-profit wants to get traffic to the site, so it's going to probably be linked to that conversation. Is that enough? Or
No, definitely. That's a great point. Content is the most difficult part of the website, but
it just comes to me. It's a bit like what Heather was saying, is that the agency, if it's got the resources, it should help the client with that process. And it'd be ongoing, and that's where they continue making good money from the client, and really helping the client, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's gauging to see, like, do you have an audience, and then seeing what are they asking, what are their needs, and then building everything, content wise around that. I think we're up against our break, so when we come back from the break, we'll be talking our main topic, which is marketing for nonprofits. See you after the break. We're coming back from a break, and we're talking our main topic in episode 142, which is marketing for nonprofits. And one thing that I want to ask the panel, what is different about working with a nonprofit than it is working with a regular business? What sort of challenges do they face, Sallie?
Budget always seems to be an issue for the nonprofits that I work with, although it's often an issue for for-profit businesses also. But I don't think for-profit businesses run the risk of being criticized for spending money on stuff that isn't whatever their alleged purpose is. So there's that, and then there's probably the bigger issue is the number of nonprofits that depend almost exclusively on volunteers. So that having somebody to put in charge of, say, creating 50 articles, there isn't really anybody whose job that is, and trying to get that kind of information out of people is a bit challenging. And the websites themselves are not necessarily that different, but it depends a lot on the institution. I mean, fundraising is probably going to be a factor, although that depends a little bit on whether it's a C3 or a C6, or it's do they work by membership or by donations or by combinations of the above. And there may be some additional legal stuff involved, but in a lot of cases, it's you're probably dealing with a committee, and there's probably a committee of volunteers who cannot devote nearly as much time to it as it deserves, and that doesn't just affect their website; it affects everything.
No, that's an excellent point. And that actually reminds me of experiences that I've had, and I want to ask this to Morten. With nonprofits, there are a lot of volunteers, and there's often a board of members. How does that affect, decision making? How does it slow things down? How does it affect the whole process of moving forward?
it all depends on how well the nonprofit is managed. Our community and the whole web community often has these very ridiculous conversations about how having a boss is terrible and how managers are terrible people and blah, 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 blah. Well, if you work a lot with nonprofits, and especially so-called grassroots nonprofits, you quickly realize that management structures are incredibly valuable to get stuff done, as long as you have managers that know what they're doing and are good people and are able to communicate and prioritize and do all these things. So in some nonprofits, having a long list of contributors and a lot of volunteers is a tremendous asset, because it basically provides an engine that produces content, that produces input, that engages the community, and it's just amazing. In other nonprofits, having the same level of commitment from the volunteer base causes total chaos, because they're not being managed properly, or they have vastly disparate agendas, because there is no cohesive approach to anything. So to be honest, whenever we're approached by nonprofits, we often look at how well they work before we even consider talking to them, because getting involved with a nonprofit that has a flat leadership structure and a lot of members is pretty much a guarantee for endless meetings of argumentation where nothing ever gets done. And the end result of it is you might build a fantastic website, but it'll never reach its potential, and it'll never achieve what they want, simply because they have a deeper rooted issue. So it all depends.
Definite. Jonathan, are you sharing a link here in chat that you want to discuss here?
Yeah, it's from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and I think I'll just read the first paragraph because it's a little bit boring if you read something out on a podcast, but it says, since 1970, more than 200,000 non-profits have been opened in the US, but only 144 of them have reached 50 million in annual revenue. That's not surprising. Most members of these elite groups get big by doing two things. They raise the bulk of their money from a single type of funder, such as a corporation or government, and not, as conventional wisdom would recommend, by going after diverse sources of funding. Just as important, these non-profits create professional organizations that were tailored to the needs of the primary funding resources. And I think that's very linked to just what Morten's just said, isn't it?
Yep, most definitely. Do you have any experiences with nonprofits?
I think there's non-profits and there's non-profits. There's that's why I read out that thing, because I noticed in Nevada, which is the bulk of my experience, is that they're quasi-state and also federal government funded non-profit entities, which also seek other forms of funding from the general public, and they tend. It's hard as a small agency to actually get in the door of one of those clients, because they tend to have very large, quite considerable budgets, and they have a lot of structure. They're more like dealing with state government in a way, and normally you can only deal either through reputation or you've been through direct referral, and then you got the bulk of these other non-profits that I've dealt with a few, and they can be totally chaotic in what they're trying to achieve. So it's really difficult. It just really depends. But you can become very negative about helping such organisations, but you really need a strong agreement of what you're going to be doing, what you're not going to be doing. And they normally got a ridiculously long list, which they can never achieve because, like what Morten says, it's volunteer base. And it's a bit like herding cats in some extent. So I'm going to stop there because it can get you a little bit too negative, and I don't want to, because a real focused non-profit, and it really has to understand its funding model, can still do regionally and locally a lot of good. So I don't want to come across as too negative, really, John.
Absolutely. So, if they know their goal, they can definitely still achieve it. And that's something I want to ask Sallie, when it comes to goals with nonprofits, when it comes to marketing, what unique challenges do nonprofits have when they're setting their goals and going about achieving them, through their marketing efforts? How what challenges are different between a nonprofit and a regular business?
I'm thinking, the first thing, of course, is making sure you know what your goals are. And that's true whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit or an individual or anything. And, in that case, it's kind of like Morten says, is there a structure in place where it's clear to everybody what your mission is and what you're trying to accomplish and where your priorities are? Or is it a situation where, that kind of varies depending on who your current group of volunteers is and what level of consistency has been passed down, and how aware are people of what needs to change. When I moved out to Oakley, I got involved in the local Chamber of Commerce, mostly to meet people, not so much because I thought it was going to do a lot for my business. And, being the sort of person I am, after the first year, I found myself in charge of the thing. And, and I quickly came to realize, one, this was not a job for a sole proprietor. Because to do it properly, I would have been able to spend no time in my own business at all. But two, there was a whole bunch of stuff that somebody should have sat down and dealt with 10 years before, in terms of, all right, we have a changing environment here for businesses. What actually is the value of a chamber of commerce in the 21st century? Because there had been several years worth of seeing that the sort of stuff that they always did, the kinds of events they had as fundraisers, were not working in the same way and attracting the same things, and nobody had really addressed that. And it was sort of like, well, by the time we started thinking about this, there was no money left, and everything was sort of scrambling and desperate, and we did build them an awesome website that, gave the members some value for money that they hadn't been getting before. But there was just a whole bunch of stuff that needed to be turned around. And, you may get some advantages as a nonprofit in terms of marketing. I know that the city helped us with, sending out postcards for things, and you may have more access to certain kind of databases or freedom in contacting folks that you wouldn't as a for-profit business. But at the same time, you still have to be very careful about understanding who your supporters are. I mean, if you're an organization where that big companies in X or Y industry are where we get 99% of our money, then it's pretty clear those are the people you need to appeal to. And with luck, if there's only a handful of those companies, you may have personal connections, you may be able to work with that. But if it's just sort of like, well, okay, so like everybody who lives within a 10-mile radius of here, that's not a cohesive group that you can appeal to. It's like trying to market your book when you say, but my ideal reader is everybody. No, it's not. It's not. And you have to figure out, if for some reason you're not appealing to the people you used to appeal to, then do you find a different group of people? Do you find a different way to become appealing? And that can be challenging.
No, very good. And to follow up with that, to ask Morten, when it comes to like reaching goals with nonprofits, how do they find those targeted segments? How do you identify like who you're actually trying to reach when it comes to fundraising or, whatever those goals might be? How do you find those people to market to?
Well, this is less a web design or content planning conversation than a how do you start a nonprofit question. But it addresses an important point. I think a lot of, no, not a lot of, I have encountered several nonprofits that were made because people with very, very good intentions saw a need and wanted to fill that need, without fully considering what is involved in creating a nonprofit and how much effort it takes and how much of an uphill battle it is to get it to work properly. The thing people often forget about nonprofit is nonprofit does not mean free and does not mean we don't earn money. In fact, running a nonprofit usually is incredibly expensive because you're not generating income. A lot of your time is spent just getting funding from different sources that are not as reliable as selling a product. And it's very easy for nonprofits to get stuck in a number of different ruts. It could be funding, it could be management of people, it could be just reaching the right audience. And if you haven't, in the very beginning of the process, decided, here's what we're going to do to make that happen, we need to reach these particular people, and those people need to be able to do this for us, you really can't get anywhere. So if this conversation, what you asked me, if that conversation happens in the discussion of a web design, you need to back out, because this is not a functioning nonprofit that will get anything done. Now, how do you find that audience? It's the same way you find the audience for any other project. You create a content strategy for your project. You have to start by saying, who is it that we think we want to reach? And what is it we think we want to tell them? Then you define those people. Then you go out into the real world and you actually find those people. And you talk to them and you say, what is it you would want from us? How would you like this information to be presented to you? That gives you a better understanding of what is actually going on, rather than your crazy idea of what the world is like. Based on those people, you can then build personas, and you can then build a content strategy around meeting their needs, because your company or your nonprofit will have needs and requirements and goals. Those are irrelevant if you're not meeting the needs, requirements, and goals of the audience. So talking to the audience makes the difference. You need to know what they want so you can serve them up, and then figure out a way of, while serving them what they want, also meeting the goals of the nonprofit or the organization. It's a lot of work. It's not as simple as saying everyone needs a goat in the backyard because that will make the world better. You have to figure out, why do people not want goats in the backyard? How can I answer the questions they have about goats in the backyard? And also, how can I provide them with enough information that they will change their minds, get a goat, put it in the backyard, tell their neighbor to do the same, and fund my nonprofit in the process?
Most definitely. Here's a follow-up question to that. Are there examples of nonprofits that, just off the top of the head, that you see doing a good job, going out there and marketing themselves? And what are they doing?
There are tons. There are great nonprofits all over the place. In Canada, we have Ladies Learning Code. Mm-hmm. They do an amazing job. Just amazing. They have grown from basically a small grassroots organization of people who just wanted to get more women involved in development to a massive national movement, to the point where they now have the support of the government, to the point where they're now making, like, Canada learns to code. Like, they've expanded to the point where it's like mind-blowing to see how big it got. What they did was they went in and said, we see a need for or we see a conversation in the community about everyone needs to learn how to code. And we see how that conversation is being kind of ruined by a lack of understanding of what coding is involved, what is involved in coding, supporters of the program that don't know anything about the industry, and an overall problem in the community of lack of diversity. So what can we do to fix that? Well, we can target a specific group that is underrepresented in the community. And the biggest of the groups that are underrepresented in the community is women, because women constitute more than half of the world population, right? So what do we do to target women? Well, there are two types of women. There are young women and not young women. So then you can have ladies learning code and girls learning code. And you make some arbitrary line and you say, like, anyone under this arbitrary line is defined as a girl, any over is defined as ladies. And you create two programs, one that's targeted at the younger ones, one that's targeted at the older ones. And then you engage the community, try to find the people who want to teach these classes, who are willing to do it. You get them into a room, you discuss with them how to reach the audience, then you find actual people who would be the target audience and talk to them, and then you build a massive community around it. And you do it in tiny, tiny, tiny steps. You make small individual chapters in every single town. You get them to do small individual workshops just to get it started. It's a massive process that takes many years. But if you do it like that, really consider what you're doing. You stake out your goals. You make small goals, bigger goals, biggest goals. It works.
I totally want to start Crohn's Learn to Code.
You're not in the third stage of life yet. Come on now. You're not there. But something you reminded me of, like, Morten, too, there's another organization, like, here in the States, Black Girls Code, that's doing like a similar thing. And I actually see them all over social media. They do workshops, they do events, they publicize stuff. They're, out there being active, making an actual real difference in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, building for the future, but, also, like, pulling, like, more people into it by publicizing that. And something I want to ask the panel too, when it comes to, like, publicizing, like, what you're actually doing, how do nonprofits, like, organize that and stay on top of that? Jonathan.
Yeah, I just a little bit off from what your question is. Hopefully you give me a little bit of slack. Just to respond to what Morten says quickly, and then I wanted to give some steps about some down to earth steps that maybe a non-profit that's got some idea about who its target is, the things we've just discussed. Just to comment on what Morten says to start off with is that I do another podcast, and we had a successful CEO on, and he was talking about, it's all right having this global picture and these big plans, but what I've learned is you just every week, every month, are we 1 or 2% or just a fraction nearer to our goals? And that's how I run my business, is have we moved on to our goals every month, every 6 months, and are we any closer? And as long as we're moving to our goals and we can keep on going, we've got the resources to keep on going, it's fine. So it was a bit of eye-opener, a little bit to me. On the practical stuff, as long as you've got everything like Sallie and Morten in place, I think obviously having a mobile responsive website is really important. Most of the people are going to be looking on the site on a tablet, on a phone. I think another thing that most non-profits really need to concentrate on, just like a business, which was what Morten was pointing out, is really building up your mailing list. Unfortunately, I noticed with a lot of non-profits that Constant Contact has spent a lot of time and energy getting themselves entrenched in the non-profit organisation. They give heavy discounts. They do a lot of webinars. They go out and do a lot of outreach. They have one of their employees come to Northern Nevada every year and does live webinars. I don't think it's a great platform myself, so I try and get them off constant contact. But I get them to get really real about building up a substantial mailing list, if it's possible, because that is a direct way that they can contact their supporters. You also get a lot. It's also linked to the amount of content that needs to go on the site, which is linked to our previous conversation and what Morten was pointing out. So having some structure, and also you've got the social media element. That's one of the benefits. If you can get people, it's normally easier to get volunteers to really help out on the Facebook and the Twitter side, on the social media. They like that. And then you have a smaller core of more dedicated individuals that, as long as there's some structure, they will help out on the blogging site. But you need a team leader that, so the schedule is kept to around the content, and also spending more time on the actual content of the newsletter, of the outreach, is really important. So what do you think, John? I'll try to give some powerful kind of points that any non-profit should look at.
No, definitely. There is a lot of outreach that needs to be done. Building your email list is definitely part of that. Keeping up, your blog schedule, and helping out with Twitter and Facebook. Anyway, I know Morten has to leave. Morten, tell us really quick where to find you.
You can find me on the Twitter at Morten, because that's my name. That's MOR10. And I also blog on my own site at morten.com, and on LinkedIn Pulse, and on the LinkedIn Learning blog. You can find all of it on the internet. All right. Definitely. Thank you. I have to leave.
Thank you, Morten. We'll catch you.
I think we might as well wrap up the podcast part of the show, John, and then we go on quickly on to the bonus content, because we're up on the hour now. What do you think?
Let's do that. So just want to encourage people, if you're getting value from this podcast, make sure you go to iTunes, give it a rating, give it a detailed description, like in your rating. The more reviews that we get, the more people will find us. It basically is like SEO for iTunes.
That's great. And folks, we'll be back next Saturday. Sallie, would you like to tell the audience how they can get hold of you?
Certainly. My website is WP-Fangirl.com, and I am at Sallie Goetsch on Twitter and in various other places. If you can spell my name, you can find me online.
And John, how can people find you?
Well, you can find me at my website, which is lockdowndesign.com. And if you dare, you can follow me on Twitter, lockdown_. How do we find you, Jonathan?
Email me at jonathan@wp-tonic.com. I also like to mention, folks, that we've now opened up WP-Tonic for comments. Anything, please go to this show or any of the other shows you listen to, and there'll be extra bonus content, and leave some comments about how useful you found the show. Anything you say, me and John will respond to. We want to build a discussion on the site and be more proactive about that. And the other way to get hold of me, folks, is Twitter at Jonathan Denwood. I'm pretty active there.
Very good. And tune into the website for the bonus content. We'll see you on the flip side.
Bye.
Bonus content.
So, Sallie, what do you think? I think it's such a broad subject, isn't it, Sallie? Really, isn't it?
It's a huge thing, and it's hard to say really very specific things about building websites for nonprofits, because nonprofits, there are so many different kinds of nonprofits, and they have so many different sorts of goals and audiences and things that they're trying to accomplish, that as with any other site, you're kind of looking at, well, first, what are we trying to do? And then, how can we do that? And how can your website help you do that? And there may be, depending on the age of the nonprofit and so on, there may be low-hanging fruit like, let's get you actually signed up with some mailing list software and and have some email capture on your website. Or you may be dealing with somebody where they're well established, they're well funded, they have very complex needs and different groups that they're reaching out to, and so it's it's tough to be real specific without knowing more information.
Yeah, I think on the positive side, and I'd be interested if you and John agree, on the positive side, I think there's a lot more ways, very inexpensive ways, time expensive, but in initial costs, that you can reach an audience, a local regional audience for a non-profit through email, through social media, Facebook Live, videos on your website. Every decent smartphone's got a camera. You can do some quick video. You can be a lot more creative and get a lot more content out there if you've got a group of people that are up for it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Good.
If you've got them, if you've got people who are willing to help with that, and I have my experience with volunteers is the more specific the task that you assign, the easier it is. It's sort of like if you say, "Oh, we need help at so and so event," you're probably going to get crickets. If you say, "Here is a sign up sheet. Sign up for 1 hour to do X at this event," you're going to find more people who are able to say, "Okay, I can commit to that hour." I think that's important, that their volunteer wrangling skills are important, and that in some cases, I think there's an issue that nonprofits should not be afraid to have paid staff. In one of the recent local-ish elections, one of the candidates was complaining about the other candidate who worked for a nonprofit where some very large proportion of what I presume was not a large budget went to paying basically paying her salary as the president, and it was like $47,000 salary. I'm like, excuse you? Like, you're objecting to paying somebody a pretty modest wage for running this thing full time? It's like, yeah, okay, it might be better to like bring in more money and spend more money on accomplishing the goals, but trying to run a nonprofit, even a not terribly huge one, is a full-time job. And if you're not paying somebody, they're going to fall down on that job because it can't be their priority.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, it's a very broad subject, folks. And there's all so many different. I've noticed with the ones that are funded by the state, really strongly, they're getting like 60-70% of their yearly projected budget from state and federal funding. Yeah, they're well funded, but in some ways that enthusiasm isn't there, where a more guerrilla based charity non-profit that I've worked with can be more up for trying more creative things in a way, because they need the budget, they need some revenue coming in, so they're up for it to listen to you. Where the more in business terms, it could be more beneficial to work with that well-funded. Where you don't want to get, folks, is that when you become the object, you're doing things really at a reduced rate or for no charge, and you start to get blamed when things are not working out. That's a terrible place to find yourself in, isn't it, Sally?
The most expensive clients are always the ones that you do pro bono work for. I have a slightly reduced rate for nonprofits, but it's not like so reduced that I'm going to find myself thinking, gee, I wish I hadn't taken this job on because I'm not making enough money. But the problem with a pro bono job is unless you actually sit down and work out here all the details of your scope of work, and here's what you're getting and here's what it would cost you, they have no idea of the value of what you're doing for them. And so they value it at what they're paying you, which is nothing.
Yeah. I think actually that's very well put, actually, Sallie. Thanks for doing that. That's really great. Great. So what's been your general experience, John, of working with non-profits? Have you had any, and what's been your general experience?
Well, I've had a couple, some better than others. I've definitely had more experience with regular businesses than nonprofits, for sure. But I have had a couple with. It depends. Some are, like what we were pointing out earlier in the episode, some are very organized, and there's clear direction, there's clear management, and sometimes there's just kind of organized chaos with a board of people trying to make every decision by committee, and it really just bogs down the whole process. With nonprofits, it seems that things can move a lot more slowly than they do with general businesses, because either the budget isn't there, or the organization isn't there, or it's a more grassroots thing, or it's being run by volunteers. These are all things that can make the entire process like a lot slower. And it depends. Some have a healthy budget, and some have a shoestring budget. But the important thing, I think, is to be very clear about like how you're helping them, help them with whatever it is that you're promising to do, whether it's design, development, marketing, whatever it is. And be sure that you're dealing with the decision maker. When you're dealing with a committee, it's much harder. If you're dealing with one person who's the final decision maker, it's a lot easier. Definitely. The ones that I see doing really successful things, they seem to have at least one person that's full-time staff, and they might have interns or helpers or other people who are part-time staff doing the marketing. That seems to be the nonprofits that are really successful at getting the message out. So
yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's really important that there's some structure, and this has been a discussion that's had two sides. It's got the side of the people that are trying to help the non-profit, and also what the non-profit should know. But on the side of people, web professionals trying to help a non-profit, I think if there's no full-time individual that you can easily access and directly talk to, that has some authority to make decisions, it always has to go to a committee, and that committee has not even given that individual the right to make any fundamental decisions. It's going to be a very slow process and a bit torturous. So maybe that you should consider that if you take on the actual job, and that's something you should understand. Would you agree with that, John?
yeah, it's best to know who you're dealing with, and make sure everything's crystal clear. Like I said, it's the ones that have like some sort of organization where there's like a definite structure at the top, where there's a management structure, it's easier to deal with, and say even they have like a marketing team, like somebody like doing their Facebook or their Twitter campaigns or Instagram or whatever. If they're being given clear direction by somebody who's kind of saying like these are the things that we need to promote, and these are the goals that we're trying to reach, these events are important, and it usually is more successful. But definitely, and like Sallie said as well, sure that if you're discounting, make sure that they see like what you're discounting. Don't just like give it all away for free, because that's the same as working for a client, for free. They value like what they're getting. Any discounts, make sure that you put it there and then, discount it on the invoice. So.
And just to wrap up, I just want to ask Sallie a question, and then maybe we'll wrap things up, folks. Sallie, because you're based near the Bay Area, have there been any kind of campaigns, anything you've seen over the few months that's taken your eye that you thought was innovative, or you thought was any kind of non-profit you think that was doing it the right way?
I have to admit, I haven't paid that much attention. So there's nothing that's kind of immediately jumped to my mind. There are probably lots of various worthy causes and projects. There was one more thing I wanted to say on the subject of funding, is that in some ways nonprofits are in a better position to pay you than some small for-profit businesses, because if you've got a long enough lead time and you can say, here's how much it's going to cost, they can go out and look for funding. And there are grants available for for-profit businesses, especially when they're just starting, but there's a lot more that's available for nonprofits. And so, if you want to work with nonprofits, you might want to familiarize yourself with some of the resources that are out there for them, to help make sure that they can pay you what you need to make, and not go bust.
And just to finish off, folks, I thought that was a great point, Sallie. Thanks for pointing it out. I thought that was excellent. The other really great thing, folks, if you can build up enormous goodwill in your region by working with a great non-profit and have a long-term relation. The kind of relationships you can build with some heavy hitters in the region, and relationships you can build up through working with in a quality partnership where you're really helping and committed to a non-profit, can be really very, very beneficial for your business and for your career. Would you agree with that, John?
Most definitely. Nonprofits generally, look really good. They help you make connections. That's one of the things for sure. If you're like a web designer or you're a small firm that's looking to grow, helping those people connects you to like more people. Helping like a nonprofit can definitely connect you to more people in the community that support of those causes and those issues. And a good way to often connect to people who have some sort of stroke in your community is to be at fundraisers and charity events. Because
it's a bit, sorry to interrupt, John, it's a bit linked to what Heather Steele said about the workshops. That was in our previous episode, folks. Heather Steele saying that, they did these workshops in their local community, and she said that that they weren't exactly their target audience, but those people knew a lot of people that were their target audience, and that's one of the reasons why they did the workshops.
No, for real, everything is a ripple effect. Everything is not like a one-to-one correlation of getting business. A lot of time it ripples outwards. So, but definitely, find a good nonprofit that you want to support. If they have like if they need help with marketing or their website or whatever, and if you feel like doing some pro bono work, that's great. Definitely, I want to give a shout out to a nonprofit here that does a really good job in Sacramento, which is Weave, which is for helping like the battered women. That's definitely like a nonprofit that does a really good job with their site and with their marketing. Definitely want to shout them out. So
that's great. So I think we'll wrap this up now, John.
Okay.
We'll go off here.
Okay. I guess that's my cue.